Today, I want to talk about a dramatic, complex, and deeply troubling story that is unfolding right now. Protests erupting all over the world as Israel intercepts the Global Sumud Flotilla. This is not just a headline. It touches on war, humanitarian suffering, international law, activism, and global solidarity. I'll walk you through what's happening, why it matters, and what the possible implications are. A few days ago, the Global Sumud Flotilla, a large convoy of ships carrying activists, humanitarian aid, symbolic goods, and a message of resistance, was sailing toward Gaza. Its stated goal was to challenge Israel's naval blockade and to try to deliver aid directly to the besieged Gaza Strip. Over 40 vessels, hundreds of participants from dozens of countries, including prominent figures like Greta Thunberg and Mandela Mandela, Nelson Mandela's grandson, joined the mission. As the flotilla neared Gaza, Israeli naval forces began intercepting the vessels, boarding them, and detaining the occupants. Most of the flotilla was stopped before it could reach Gaza. The last ship, named Marinette Polish, flagged, was also boarded eventually, though it had been trailing behind and attempted to sail closer to Gaza's coast. In total, more than 450 activists and participants were detained, transported to Israel, and are being processed for deportation. Even before the interception, the flotilla organizers had signaled that this would be a dramatic gesture not just about aid, but about consciousness, about breaking the silence, about reminding the world of the blockade, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and the sense that many feel that traditional diplomacy and aid mechanisms have failed. The name Sumud itself means steadfastness or resilience, in Arabic capturing the spirit behind the mission. Once the interceptions became public, protests broke out globally. In multiple countries in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and beyond, people marched, held vigils, demonstrated in front of Israeli embassies and consulates, and rallied in solidarity with the detained activists and with Gaza more broadly. In Italy, for example, unions declared a general strike. In major cities like Rome, Milan, Florence, massive protests took place. In some places, protests saw clashes with police, partial vandalism, or damage to property, though many demonstrations remained peaceful. In Pakistan, too, there were calls for solidarity and protests in Karachi. In Latin America, in Mexico City and Buenos Aires, people joined the wave. Governments around the world issued statements, some condemning Israel's actions, others calling for restraint, and many demanding the release of detainees. To understand what's going on, we need to see several layers: legal, humanitarian, political, moral, and symbolic. From a legal viewpoint, the flotilla organizers argue that Israel's interception is a violation of international law. They contend that many of the boardings were conducted in international waters beyond the 12 nautical mile territorial limit, making Israel's actions extraterritorial and potentially illegal. Organizations such as Amnesty International have been vocal. They say the interception is unlawful and amounts to a tactic to enforce starvation in Gaza by choking off vital humanitarian corridors. Israel, on the other hand, maintains that the flotilla was a provocation, that the vessels threatened security, and they claim they have the right under their interpretation of wartime maritime rules to enforce the blockade. Israel also offered to receive the aid and deliver it themselves, insisting that the interception was legal and that the detained activists would be deported. Critics argue that this offer does not absolve Israel of responsibility because, after all, if you block access and insist that only you deliver it, you maintain control over who gets what, and aid becomes politicized. Moreover, Israel's blockade of Gaza has been contested for years as collective punishment, a policy of denying essential supplies, food, water, medicine to a civilian population. Many legal scholars see this as a violation of humanitarian law. On the flip side, Israel and its supporters often argue that during hostilities, blockades are permitted under laws of war, provided certain conditions are met: notification, impartiality, and not starving civilians, and that Gaza is a war zone, justifying stricter security controls. The legal debate is complex and fiercely contested. In humanitarian terms, Gaza is in crisis. The siege, repeated bombings, infrastructure destruction, severe shortages of basic necessities all contribute to widespread suffering among civilians. The flotilla mission was in part a symbolic attempt to shine a spotlight on this crisis and to challenge the world to demand free access of aid, not just through the small crossings Israel allows, but directly via sea or other routes. Critics of Israel argue that by blocking independent aid approaches, Israel ensures that aid remains under its control, effectively choosing whose life is saved and whose isn't. Amnesty's language is sharp. They say Israel's interception is part of a determination to continue deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. Politically, the flotilla interception escalated tensions. Countries condemned Israel's actions. Turkey called them terrorism. South Africa demanded the release of detainees, including Mandla Mandela. Spain, too, has expressed diplomatic measures, summoned Israeli diplomats, demanded protection for detained Spaniards. Meanwhile, the Israeli Internal Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir made a video mocking activists, calling them terrorists. This added fuel to outrage. In many countries, domestic protests put pressure on governments about their stance on Israel and Gaza. In Italy, the Prime Minister criticized the activists, calling their aims misguided, forcing a tough balancing act politically. The controversies also spread to trade, diplomacy, and alliances. Some countries suspended or threatened to suspend agreements. Meanwhile, the flotilla's organizers hoped that the interception itself would amplify their message, perhaps giving them a louder voice than if they'd simply sailed without confrontation. Symbolically, the flotilla and its interception is a powerful moment. It places the narrative of Gaza's suffering in stark relief. It challenges people to ask, who controls aid, who decides life and death, what is permissible under war? Can an act of civil society defy siege by sea? When peaceful activism intersects with state power, what is the limit? The global protests suggest that many people around the world feel this moment resonates, that the flotilla has become a banner for solidarity, outrage, and a test of international conscience. Now, the repercussions are still unfolding. Many detainees are being deported to their home countries. Some are resisting deportation by entering legal challenges. There are questions about their treatment, their safety, their legal rights, especially since many were from vulnerable backgrounds or came as part of civil society groups. In Israel, many have been placed in prisons in the Negev desert or in facilities designated for migrants or detainees. Israel is pushing to conclude the procedures swiftly. Some countries are coordinating to secure the safe return of their nationals. The future legal battles may involve international law bodies, human rights courts, and possibly even the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Beyond that, pressure may mount on Israel and its allies to reevaluate the blockade, or to permit alternate routes for aid. International donors, NGOs, and states may be pushed to demand more transparency and accountability. The political cost for Israel may rise in reputation, diplomatic relations, alliances, and public opinion worldwide. But it's not automatic that this moment changes policy. States often resist pressure, especially over national security arguments. The rhetoric of provocation and threat is powerful, and Israel has historically taken strong stances against flotillas and blockade breakers. The legal ambiguity, the fog of war, the politicization of aid, all these factors make sweeping change difficult. That said, this flotilla interception and the protest wave make for one of the most visible challenges to the Gaza blockade in years. It may shift the public narrative and create louder pressure than in earlier years. As an audience, as citizens of the world, what can we take from this? We should ask questions. How do we support humanitarian access? How do we protect civilians in war? Do we allow states to monopolize aid, especially when control over life and death is at stake? Also, activism has risk. Many of those aboard the flotilla knowingly risked detention, confrontation, even violence, to draw attention to suffering. That courage and that risk speak to how deeply some feel about Gaza's fate. This story also underlines that conflicts are not just fought with weapons, they are fought in media, law, public opinion, protest, and symbolism. In closing, this moment is more than a maritime confrontation. It's a crossroads. It forces global society to reckon with the moral, legal, and humanitarian consequences of blockade and war. The protests around the world suggest many believe that this is too big to ignore. Time will tell whether those voices translate into real change for Gaza, for international norms, and for the people whose lives hang in the balance.